Russia abolished the chattel slavery of the American South without ever having practiced it, long before the first shots were fired in the American Civil War. Emperor Nicholas I banned the human trade of Africans in Russia in 1842. Any black slave who stepped on Russian soil would be declared a free man. This happened 23 years before slavery was abolished in the United States, and 19 years earlier than serfdom itself was abolished in Russia, which, although not a form of chattel slavery, deprived the peasants of their personal freedom. So how has life been for black people in Russia, from the olden days till the present? In 2018, at the height of World Cup action, articles appeared in foreign media with headlines like "African migrants in Russia describe hell on earth," and "Football racism still rife in 2018 World Cup host Russia." But when you're talking about a country of 148 million people, making generalizations doesn't really work. For example, we have the dark-skinned Lenin, as the old ladies call him, in a village 120 kilometers from Moscow. If there's anywhere where a black person would not be accepted, it is, one might imagine, the Russian heartland, where the least tolerant to foreigners part of the population lives. But no, in 2010, Jean Sagbo from Benin was elected to the Novozavidovsky Council of Deputies, becoming the first and only black politician in Russia, and a favored son to all the grannies. But for a long time, blacks in Russia were very close to the halls of power. In the 17th to 19th centuries, black people were often servants of the European aristocracy. The most famous black man in pre-revolutionary Russia was Abraham Hannibal. As a child, he was given to Peter the Great as a house servant. Hannibal rose to the rank of major general and had many children. The poet Alexander Pushkin was his great-grandson. Black servants in Russia, as well as in Europe, showed the high status of their master, but in Russia, Africans only served the Tsars exclusively. The official position of Moor of the imperial court was given to the black men in service at the royal palace. The Moors were dressed lavishly. Their daily uniform was a costly 500 rubles. At the time, a man's suit in St. Petersburg cost 6 rubles. In the palace, the Moors of the imperial court were mostly on duty as doormen. But under Emperor Alexander II, they also prepared the king's hookah. So, on average, black people were living to a higher standard than your average Russian peasant in the empire. But in 1917, revolution came and smashed the monarchy. And so, how did that affect black lives in Russia? By the 1930s, the number of blacks in Russia began to increase, with engineers from Western European and American companies coming to the USSR from abroad for their work shifts. In Soviet Russia, they received a warm welcome, and the authorities sought to show that they were building a state in which the skin color of its citizens did not matter. After Stalin's death, the Soviet leadership turned its attention to African countries, looking for political allies and markets for its products. The second wave of Africans came to the Soviet Union in the late 1950s. The USSR began attracting African students to study at the new Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow, which is now known as the People's Friendship University of Russia. The culmination of Soviet-African friendship occurred in 1957, when the 6th World Festival of Youth and Students was held in Moscow. The event was absolutely massive and led to many international couples forming. This coined the term Children of the Festival, which became a common way to refer to mixed-race children in the USSR.
Наш. Богатырь! Богатырь наш!
At the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, almost 30,000 African students were studying in Soviet universities. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the situation for black people in Russia began to deteriorate. The 1990s were dangerous and unstable times, and standing out was definitely not a good thing. However, it must be noted that the Russians themselves turned out to be ethnic minorities and the victims of racism in many of the former Soviet republics. Here's what an immigrant from the Congo said to a French publication about the situation. Quote, "I say this with tears in my eyes. It's not easy to live here. This is the 21st century, but we are still being insulted. I'm ashamed to repeat it. Chimpanzee, Negro, go back to Africa. This is Russia, and no one needs you here." End quote. But that was the early 2000s. Let's talk to some Africans who live here now.
Russian friends I've made here have been really, really good. They're always offering to teach me how to speak better, and are just friendly people. People you even meet in the stores. Very nice, very nice people. I am actually happy with my life here in Russia. It's been great so far. I have nothing to complain about.
I'm a stranger among my own people. I grew up here. I have a purely Russian mentality. I think like a Russian person, but because of the fact that I don't look Russian, they still let me know that I'm not Russian. I'm used to defending myself. They call me the English word nigger. I'll say something funny in response, like, Yeah, you can't see me in the dark, only my teeth and eyes stick out. It's easier for me to be the first to point out the elephant in the room and use dark humor in defense before someone else gets a say, and say something potentially actually hurtful.
At the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, it was a nightmare. In 2002, 2003, there was a skinhead movement in Muitishu where I was living. My life at the time was oriented purely on survival. It finally fell apart and ended around 2006. It's just that Russians have a different manner and different values. For example, speaking to somebody rudely is not considered a bad thing. That is, rudeness is celebrated in your culture. And it is clear that if a person is uneducated, it can manifest itself in such ugly ways. But I actually think most people aren't this way. It's just that this minority is ruining everything, because it attracts a lot of attention. Our values have grown, that we need education, that we need to play sports, get ourselves in order, that we need to learn to negotiate with people and not flex our biceps to get a response. In other words, this is a common culture that comes from movies and music, and it changes people.
Well, opinions seem to be certainly divided. Some black people are still having a hard time in Russia. But what's important is what Gro Bakum said, that there are positive trends, and his opinion is backed up by statistics.
The number of hate crimes is declining and in 2019 reached a 15-year low. And there are fewer and fewer regions where crimes based on racial hatred are recorded.
Human rights activists say that the situation for black migrants has improved, as now members of extremist groups are much more likely to face criminal prosecution.
For comparison, here are the statistics of crimes against family members for 2018.
We live in a world full of conflict, and racism is never going to go away. But that doesn't mean that black people in Russia are oppressed. Black people make up less than a fraction of 1% of the population, so reactions to them are usually based on curiosity or surprise and not hatred.
Today they can live here, serve in the army, help out old ladies, drive a tram, or study at a university. And speaking of studies, here are just a few graduates of the Russian People's Friendship University.
The movie Circus was a defining film of the 1930s, and in it, black actor James Patterson played the role of the son of the main character. But at the time, he was only 2 years old. But despite his age, he became a national celebrity overnight. So, if you're curious about Russian cinema, then please like, share, and comment, because if you do, we'll make a whole video all about it just for you.